Listen here, children. Come close now. Let the fire warm your bones while I warm your souls with a truth the white man's history books tried to bury deep as cotton roots. This ain't no fairy tale, no sir. This here's a memory written in blood on Mississippi clay. A testimony passed down through trembling lips and heavy hearts, from the quarters to the fields, from the auction block to the grave. They called her Charity. Charity, like that word meant something to the white folks who owned her body, but could never chain her spirit. Born into bondage when the cotton was king and black flesh was currency, she walked this cursed earth under a sun that showed no mercy and masters who showed even less. The plantation was Belle Grove, pretty name for a hell on earth, where white cotton grew fat on black blood and the soil itself cried out with the pain of our people. Now what I'm fixing to tell you happened in them dark days before the war, when a mother's love could get her children whipped, when protecting what was sacred could cost you everything, and when the only justice we knew was the justice we took with our own hands. This story carries the weight of chains, the crack of the whip, the smell of blood on wood, and the sound of a mother's rage turning into righteous fury. Lord have mercy on my soul for telling it, but somebody got to remember. Somebody got to speak for them who can't speak no more. So settle in, brace your heart, and don't you look away. 'Cause this here's the story of how charity became vengeance, how a mother's love became a master's nightmare, and how one night in Mississippi, the blood that watered the cotton finally ran white instead of black. They say you can still hear the screams at Belle Grove on stormy nights. They say the whipping post never came clean. They say her ghost walks them quarters still, protecting children that ain't even born yet. This is her story, our story, and it starts where all our stories start, in chains, in darkness, across the cruel waters they called the Middle Passage. The harbor at Charleston stank of death and salt and human misery all mixed together like the devil's own stew. It was 1830, late summer, when the heat sat heavy on the water and the gulls circled overhead like they was waiting for souls to rise up. The ship, they called it the Nightingale, pretty name for a floating coffin, had crossed the Middle Passage with its belly full of African flesh, and now it sat there in the harbor, groaning with the weight of all that suffering. Down in the hold, pressed tight as cordwood, was a girl who would one day be known as Charity. But that day, chained in darkness with the smell of death thick in her nose, she had another name, Ayodele, which meant joy has come home in the Yoruba tongue her mama spoke. Weren't no joy in that hold though. Just the sound of chains clinking, folks moaning in languages the white folks couldn't understand, and the slosh of the sea against wood that had heard too many prayers go unanswered. She was maybe 12 years old, skinny as a whip but strong-backed already from work in her village's yam fields back home in what the white folks called the Gold Coast. She'd been taken in a raid, men with guns and chains coming at dawn, fire eating up her mama's hut, her daddy's head split open like a melon while he tried to fight. They took the strong ones, the young ones, left the old folks and babies to burn or starve. Didn't matter which. The voyage lasted 63 days. 63 days of bodies pressed so tight you couldn't tell whose sweat was dripping on you, whose blood you was laying in, whose last breath you was breathing. Folks died every day down there. The crew would come with lanterns, step over the living to drag out the dead, throw 'em overboard like they was nothing but spoiled meat. Ayodele learned to keep her eyes open in the dark, learned to swallow her screams, learned that rage could keep you warm when hope froze up and died. Now listen here, child. That girl survived when stronger folks perished. She survived the chains that rubbed her ankles raw to bone, survived the fever that took half the hold, survived the feeling that the ancestors had turned their backs and left their children to drown in the belly of a beast. How she done it? Well, some say she made a promise down there in the dark. Some say she called on spirits older than the ocean itself. Some say she just had a fire in her that wouldn't go out, no matter how much salt water tried to drown it. When they finally brought him up on deck, Lord have mercy, the sunlight hit like a fist. Ayodele couldn't see, couldn't hardly stand, her legs all twisted from being folded up so long. The white sailors laughed, poked at the captives with sticks, hosed them down with seawater that burned every cut and sore. They was getting the merchandise ready for sale, see? Had to make the Africans look presentable, healthy-like, so they'd fetch a good price at the auction block. Charleston's auction block sat in the center of town like a throne of shame, raised up high so everybody could see the commerce of human flesh. White men in fine clothes gathered round, touchin' and proddin', checking teeth like you'd check a horse, feeling muscles, peering into eyes to see if the spirit was broke yet, or if there was still some fight that needed beaten out. Iodel stood there naked except for a dirty cloth, her body all bones and angles, her skin covered in the sores and scars of the passage. But her eyes, Lord, her eyes, they burned with something that made some of the buyers step back. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't lower her gaze. She stared straight ahead like she was seeing through this world into another one, like she was memorizing every white face for some future reckoning. That's when Josiah Hargrove stepped up to the block. He was a plantation master from Mississippi, owner of Belle Grove, a man who grew his cotton white and his wealth red with our blood. He was looking for field hands, strong ones who could work from can't see to can't see in the burning sun. He walked around Iodel slow, studied her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "This one got spirit," he said to the auctioneer, his voice flat as the Delta plane. "Might need breaking, but she'll work hard once she learns her place." The auctioneer, a fat man with tobacco juice stained in his beard, nodded eager-like. "Yes, sir, Mr. Hargrove. Fresh off the boat from Africa. Young, strong-backed, got many years of work in her. And look at them hands. Built for picking cotton, them hands are." Hargrove bid $60, 60 pieces of silver for a human soul. And just like that, Iodel became property. They wrote it down in a ledger, official-like, as if ink and paper could make slavery righteous. They put new chains on her wrists, lighter than the ship chains but heavy enough to remind her she wasn't free, would never be free. Not in this life anyway. The journey to Belle Grove took 2 weeks by wagon, through country that got hotter and flatter the further west they went. Iodel rode in the back with 5 other newly bought slaves, all of them silent, all of them staring at the land that would be their prison. The overseer, a mean-eyed white man named Cobb, rode alongside with a rifle across his lap and a whip coiled at his hip like a snake waiting to strike. When they finally arrived at Belle Grove, the sun was setting blood red over fields of cotton that stretched far as the eye could see. The big house sat on a rise, all white columns and wide porches, looking down on the slave quarters like a king looking down on his subjects. The quarters themselves was nothing but a row of wooden cabins, each one barely big enough to turn around in, with dirt floors and roofs that leaked when it rained. An old woman met them at the quarters. Folks called her Aunt Beulah, though she wasn't nobody's real aunt. She was the one who taught new slaves the rules. Don't look white folks in the eye, don't talk back, don't run unless you're ready to die. Work hard and maybe you'll live to see another season. "What they call you, child?" Beulah asked, her voice soft but her eyes sharp as broken glass. Iodel opened her mouth to speak her true name, but something stopped her. In that moment she understood that Iodele, the girl who had danced at festivals, who had helped her mama grind cassava, who had laughed under African stars, that girl was gone, drowned somewhere in the Atlantic. What stood here now was something else, something forged in the ship's hold and tempered by the auction block's shame. "Charity," she said, the English word strange and bitter on her tongue. "They call me Charity." And that's how it started, child. That's how the girl from across the water became the woman of Belle Grove, how Iodel became Charity, how a spirit that should have been broke learned instead to bend like iron in the fire, waiting for the day it could strike back. The first night in the quarters, Charity lay on the hard ground and listened to the sounds of the plantation. The overseer's dog barking, the wind through the cotton, the quiet sobbing of other slaves who'd already learned that tears don't change nothing. She touched the scars on her ankles where the ship chains had bit deep, and she made herself another promise, this one in a whisper so low only the ancestors could hear. "I survived the water. I'll survive this too. And one day they're gonna be a reckoning. This I swear." The moon rose full and white over Belle Grove that night, casting shadows long as history across the cotton fields. And if you'd been listening real close, You might have heard the earth itself groan under the weight of all that was coming, all the blood and fire and righteous fury that was being born in the heart of one enslaved girl who refused to let her spirit die. But promises made in the dark don't fill your belly or stop the overseer's whip. And Charity learned that quick enough when the work bell rang at first light, calling all hands to the fields. The cotton at Bell Grove grew in rows so long they looked like they stretched clear to the edge of the world. White bolls clustered thick on plants that stood waist-high by late summer, each one needing to be picked clean by sundown, or there'd be hell to pay. The work was simple but brutal. Bend, pick, stuff the sack, move down the row, bend, pick, stuff the sack. Over and over till your back screamed and your fingers bled from the sharp edges of the bowls. Charity learned the rhythm her first week. Learned it or starve. 'Cause Master Hargrove didn't feed slaves who didn't make their weight in cotton. Each picker had a quota. 80 pounds a day for a strong-backed woman. More for a man. Less for children, but not much less. Come sundown, the overseer Cobb would weigh every sack, and if you came up short, you'd meet the whipping post before you met your supper. "Move faster, girl," Cobb would shout, riding his horse slow between the rows, that whip always ready in his hand. "This ain't no Sunday picnic. Mr. Hargrove's cotton won't pick itself." The sun out in them fields was pure cruelty, beaten down with no mercy from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. It scorched the back of your neck, made your head swim, turned the air so hot you felt like you was breathing fire. Folks dropped sometimes, just fell right over from the heat and the hunger and the endless bending. If you was lucky, another slave would drag you to the shade. If you wasn't, you'd lie there till Cobb decided whether you was worth the trouble of reviving. But even in all that suffering, life found a way. That's what the old ones taught, that even in chains, even in bondage, you still human. Still got a heart that can love. Still got hope stubborn as weeds pushing up through hard ground. Charity learned to sing while she worked. Not loud. Lord, no, you didn't sing loud lest you wanted Cobb's attention. But soft under her breath, the work songs that made the hours pass and kept your spirit from drying up like cotton in drought. The other women taught her, "Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. Keep your hand on that plow, hold on. If you want to get to heaven, gotta hold on, hold on." Simple words, but they meant more than they said. Heaven might mean freedom, might mean the North Star, might just mean the end of the day when you could rest your bones. The songs was code and comfort all mixed together, a language the white folks heard but didn't understand. It was in the fields that Charity met the man who would give her 4 children and then break her heart by being taken away. His name was Isaiah, and he was tall as a cypress tree and twice as strong, with hands that could break a chain if they'd ever got the chance to try. He'd been born on Bell Grove, raised up in bondage, never known a day of freedom in his life. But he carried himself proud anyway, walked with his head up even when Cobb was watching, spoke gentle to the children and fierce to the other men about keeping their dignity no matter what. Charity noticed him her 3rd week in the fields when he helped her lift a full sack onto the wagon, his muscles straining but his face calm, like the weight was nothing at all. "You the new one from Africa," he said. Not a question but a statement, his voice deep as drum song. "I'm Charity now," she answered, meeting his eyes bold-like, forgetting for a second that she was supposed to keep her gaze down. Isaiah smiled then, just a little. "Charity, that's what they call you. But what you call yourself when ain't nobody listening?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer, 'cause it had been so long since anybody asked her something that treated her like she was more than just a pair of hands for picking cotton. "Thought so," Isaiah said, still smiling. "You got secrets in them eyes. That's good. Secrets keep a person alive out here." From that day forward, they worked near each other when they could, stole moments to talk in the fields when Cobb wasn't watching too close. Isaiah taught her more English, taught her the names of things in this strange land. The mockingbird that sang at dawn, the red clay that stuck to everything when it rained, the poison ivy you had to learn to spot or suffer the itch. But he also taught her about love, the kind of love that grows in hard soil, that has to hide in shadows and stolen glances, 'cause the master don't allow no marrying between slaves unless it benefits his pocketbook. They loved anyway, secret-like, meetin' after dark by the creek that ran past the quarters, holdin' each other while the night birds sang and the stars looked down like witnesses. In time, though time don't mean much when you enslaved, Charity's belly swelled with the first child. The old women noticed, nodded knowing-like, started slippin' her extra portions of cornbread when they could, tellin' her to rest more, work less. But that was easier said than done. Pregnant slaves still had to make their quota, still had to bend and pick and carry or else. She birthed that first baby in the quarters on a winter night, with only Aunt Beulah and 2 other women to help. No doctor, no medicine, just old knowledge passed down from the motherland about how to bring life into a world that didn't want it. They named him Josiah after the prophet who spoke truth to power, though they kept that meaning quiet. Then came Elijah 2 years later, another strong boy with his daddy's eyes and his mama's fire. Then Ruth, named for the woman in the Bible who said, "Where you go, I will go," a promise Charity whispered over her daughter every night. And finally, little Mercy, the youngest, born with a caul over her face, which the old ones said meant she could see spirits, could walk between worlds. Them 4 children was Charity's heart beating outside her body, her reason for surviving when the cotton tried to eat her soul, her hope that maybe, somehow, their lives would be better than hers, even though deep down she knew that hope was probably a lie. Isaiah worked even harder after the children came, took on extra tasks to earn a few pennies here and there, tried to save up enough to maybe, buy his family's freedom one day, though that dream was as far away as Africa itself. But Belle Grove had its rhythms, its own cruel music, and joy never lasted long in a place built on suffering. The children grew fast, despite the hard times. Little Josiah, even at 8 years old, already worked in the fields part-time, carrying water to the pickers, cleaning tools, doing whatever a child's hands could manage. Elijah was coming up behind him, learning to move quiet and quick, learning when to speak and when to hold his tongue. Ruth helped in the big house sometimes, scrubbing floors and fetching things for the mistress, coming back to the quarters with stories about the white folks' world, the fine dresses, the fancy food, the waste and excess while we starved. And little Mercy, well, she was different from the start. The other children sensed it, gave her space, watched her with a mix of fear and wonder. She'd stop sometimes in the middle of playing and stare at nothing, like she was seeing things that wasn't there. Or maybe things that was there but the rest of us couldn't see. "Mama," she'd say, her voice small and serious. "Grandmama's here. She say you need to be careful of the man with the crooked walk." Charity would go still when Mercy talked like that, 'cause her own mama back in Africa had been a priestess, a woman who spoke with the Orishas, who knew the old ways. Maybe that gift had passed through blood and ocean to rest in this child born in bondage. At night, when the work was done and the moon rose over the quarters, Isaiah would gather the children close and tell them stories, some from the Bible that the white folks preacher twisted to justify slavery, but told straight, told true. Stories about Moses leading people out of bondage, about David slaying giants, about Daniel surviving the lion's den. "Remember," he'd say, his voice quiet but firm, "we might be in chains, but our spirit's still free. Can't nobody take that, lest we let 'em." Charity would watch him with the children, watch the way Josiah listened with his whole body, the way Elijah's eyes went wide at the tales of heroes, the way Ruth leaned against her daddy's strong arm, the way little Mercy seemed to hear voices in the stories that nobody else could hear. Them was the good times, few and far between as they was, moments stolen from misery, little pockets of humanity in a world that tried every day to strip it away. But the shadow was always there, always waiting. The shadow of the master's power, of Cobb's whip, of the auction block that could split a family apart faster than axe splits wood. The shadow of the future that was coming, the darkness that was gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, the pain that would test Charity in ways she couldn't yet imagine. For now, though, for these few years, she had her children and her man, had the songs in the fields and the stories at night, had the small rebellions of the heart that kept her from going mad. She didn't know yet that Isaiah would be taken from her, Sold off for looking too high at a white man. Didn't know that her children would bleed for her protection. Didn't know that the fire burning low in her chest would one day rage so fierce it would consume everything, would turn Belgrove's white columns red with righteous vengeance. All that was coming, sure as cotton grows, sure as the overseer's whip falls, sure as the sun rises on another day of bondage. But for now, Charity picked her cotton, sang her songs, loved her family, and held tight to that promise she'd made in the ship's dark belly. That she would survive, that she would endure, and that one day somehow, there would be a reckoning. The day they took Isaiah started like any other, with the work bell ringing before dawn and the smell of wood smoke drifting from the cookhouse. But there was something heavy in the air that morning, something the old ones could feel in their bones, though they couldn't name it yet. Isaiah was working the cotton gin that day, feeding the bowls into the machine's iron teeth, his muscles straining with each pull of the lever. Master Hargrove's cousin had come visiting from Virginia, a pale-faced man named Bradford with eyes like dirty water, and a mouth that sneered at everything it saw. Bradford stood watching the work, hands behind his back, judging everything like he owned the place just by being white. When Isaiah straightened up to wipe the sweat from his face, Bradford took offense, said Isaiah had looked at him wrong, said there was defiance in them eyes, said a nigger that tall and proud needed reminding of his place. "That one there," Bradford said to Hargrove, pointing at Isaiah like he was pointing at livestock. "He's got the look of a troublemaker. I've seen his kind before. They smile and bow, but behind them eyes they're plotting. Best to sell him off before he poisons the others." Hargrove hesitated, but only for a moment. Family was family, even family that spoke foolish, and besides, Isaiah was worth good money. $800 at least to the right buyer. A plantation master's heart, if he had one at all, beat to the rhythm of profit, not mercy. "You might be right, cousin," Hargrove said, his voice flat as Delta land. "Can't be too careful these days. Too many slaves getting ideas about freedom, what with all the talk up north." Lord have mercy. They decided right there, casual as talking about the weather, to rip a man from his family, to tear a father from his children, to break a woman's heart for the crime of existing while black and strong. They didn't even let him say goodbye proper. Cobb came that evening with chains and 2 other white men, grabbed Isaiah while he was walking back from the fields. Charity heard the commotion and ran, the children following behind, all of them crying out, "Isaiah! No! Please, master, please!" Charity fell to her knees in the dirt, something she swore she'd never do, but desperation makes you forget your pride. "He ain't done nothing. He's a good worker. Please don't take him." Isaiah's eyes found hers across the distance, and in that look was everything they couldn't say out loud. All the love, all the sorrow, all the rage at a world that let this happen. He mouthed words she couldn't hear but understood anyway. Take care of our children. Survive. Little Josiah broke free from Aunt Beulah's grip and ran to his daddy, wrapped his small arms around Isaiah's legs. "Daddy! Daddy, don't go!" Cobb kicked the boy away like he was kicking a dog, sent him sprawling in the dust. That's when Isaiah lunged, chains and all, a roar tearing from his throat like a lion finally showing his teeth. It took 3 white men to hold him down, took Cobb's rifle butt to his head to make him stop fighting. Blood ran down Isaiah's face, mixing with the tears he tried so hard not to shed. They dragged him toward the wagon while his family screamed, while the other slaves watched in silence, knowing it could be them next, knowing this was the price you paid for loving too hard in a world that treated love like it was criminal. "Remember your name," Charity shouted, her voice breaking. "Remember who you are. Remember us." But the wagon was already moving, dust rising up to swallow the sight of him. And then he was gone, sold down river to some plantation in the deep south, some place where the work was harder and the life shorter, some place Charity would never see, would never know if he lived or died or suffered beyond imagining. That night, she lay in the dark cabin with her 4 children pressed against her, their tears soaking her dress, their small bodies shaken with grief. She didn't cry, couldn't cry, 'cause if she started, she feared she'd never stop. Instead, she whispered Isaiah's name over and over like a prayer, like a promise, like a curse against the white world that stole him. And somewhere deep inside, where the rage lived quiet and patient, another coal caught fire. Another piece of her heart turned to stone. Another step toward the reckoning that was coming, slow and sure as death itself. Time don't heal all wounds, children. Sometimes it just lets them fester. Lets the infection spread till your whole soul's poisoned with grief. 5 years passed after they took Isaiah. 5 years of Charity raising them children alone. 5 years of waking up reaching for a man who wasn't there. 5 years of little Mercy asking, "Mama, when's Daddy coming home?" Till Charity finally had to tell her the truth that he wasn't never coming back. The children grew despite the sorrow. Josiah turned 13, tall like his father, working full days in the fields now, his back already showing the marks of Cobb's whip from times he didn't move fast enough. Elijah was 11, quiet and watchful, learning to read a white man's mood before it turned violent. Ruth worked in the big house now, scrubbing and serving, moving like a ghost through white folks' rooms. And little Mercy. Sweet Jesus. Little Mercy was 15 years old and beautiful in a way that made Charity's heart hurt with fear. 'Cause a beautiful black girl on a plantation was a lamb in a den of wolves. That's when Elias Hargrove Jr. came home from his fancy university up north, bringing with him books and ideas and the same rotten heart his daddy had, just dressed up in educated words. Young Master Elias was 22, tall and lean with pale skin that never knew a day's real work, light brown hair slicked back with pomade, and eyes that roamed over the slave quarters like he was taking inventory of his future property. He'd been studying law, talking big about the Southern way of life, quoting scripture to justify bondage, speaking of slaves like we was children who needed white guidance to survive. But underneath all them pretty words was the same hunger, the same sickness that infected so many white men who had power over black flesh. The first time Elias Jr. saw little Mercy, she was carrying water from the well, the bucket balanced on her head the way African women had carried things for centuries. The sunlight caught her just right, made her skin glow like polished mahogany, and something shifted in Elias Jr.'s expression. A look Charity knew too well, had seen on too many white faces. A look that said, "I want that, and I can take it." "Who's that girl?" he asked his father that evening at supper, his voice casual but his interest sharp. "That's one of Charity's daughters," Master Hargrove answered, cutting into his roast beef. "The youngest. Mercy, I believe they call her. She's quite striking," Elias Jr. said, and the way he said it made his mother, Mistress Hargrove, look up sharply from her plate, her lips pressing into a thin line. She knew what that tone meant too. "She's just a field girl, son," Hargrove said, warning in his voice, but not enough warning, never enough. Best not get too attached to the help. But Elias Jr. was already attached, already calculating, already letting his eyes linger too long when little Mercy passed by, already finding excuses to be where she was working, already speaking to her in that false friendly way that made your skin crawl. "Mercy," he'd say, smiling like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. "That's a lovely name. Do you know what it means?" Little Mercy would keep her eyes down, mumble, "No, sir," and try to move away. But he'd step closer, crowd her space, make her feel trapped even in the open air. "It means compassion, forgiveness," he'd continue, ignoring her discomfort. "I wonder if you're as merciful as your name suggests." Ruth noticed first, came running to tell Charity one evening after work. "Mama, that young master, he won't leave Mercy alone. He watches her, follows her, says things that ain't right." Charity's blood went cold. She'd seen this story before, heard it whispered in the quarters, knew how it always ended. With a girl's innocence stolen, a baby born light-skinned and unwanted, a family torn apart by white men's lust and the lie that they had the right to anything they desired. That night, Charity pulled little Mercy close, looked hard into her daughter's frightened eyes. "Listen to me, child. That white boy dangerous. You stay away from him, you hear? Don't go nowhere alone. Keep Ruth or your brothers with you always." "Yes, Mama." Mercy whispered, her voice shaken. I'm scared. I know, baby. I know. Charity held her daughter tight, breathed in the smell of her hair, felt the rapid beat of her heart. But I won't let him touch you. You hear me? I'd die first. And she meant it. Lord knows she meant it. But what Charity didn't know yet was that dying wasn't gonna be enough, that protecting what was sacred would cost more than one life, would demand a price so high even the ancestors would weep at the paying of it. Young Master Elias's eyes kept following little Mercy, kept hunting her like she was prey, and the whole quarters could feel the storm gathering, could sense that Bell Grove was about to see blood spilled in ways it hadn't seen before. The summons came on a Saturday night when the moon hung fat and yellow over Bell Grove, like a bruised eye watching everything. Cobb himself came to the quarters, his boots heavy on the wooden steps, his knock on Charity's door more demand than request. Master Elias wants the girl Mercy sent up to the big house, he said through the door, not even bothering to sound polite about it. Says he needs help sorting his books in the library. She's to come now. Inside the cabin, the world stopped. Little Mercy's eyes went wide with terror, her hand clutching at her mama's arm. Josiah stood up, fists clenched, his young face hard with rage he couldn't express. Ruth grabbed Mercy's other hand, and even little Elijah understood enough to know this was wrong. Was dangerous, was the wolf finally showing his teeth. Charity felt something rise up in her chest, something she'd been holding down for 25 years of slavery. 25 years of bending and scraping and saying yes, massa, when she wanted to scream no to the whole cursed world. She stood up slow, walked to the door and opened it to face Cobb. The overseer stood there with his hand on his whip, expecting compliance like he always got. Like all white folks always got from slaves who knew the price of refusal. No, Charity said, her voice quiet but hard as iron. She ain't going. Cobb's face went red, then white, then red again. Nobody told him no. Nobody refused a direct order from the master's son. What did you say, girl? I said no. Charity stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her to keep her children from seeing what might come next. My daughter ain't going to no library at night. She's needed here. She's sick. The lie came easy, smooth as river water. Sick? Cobb's laugh was ugly. She looked healthy enough this morning in the fields. Now you get her out here, or I'll drag her out myself. You'll have to go through me first. The words hung in the night air like a challenge, like a line drawn in Mississippi dirt that said this far and no further. Other slaves had come out of their cabins now, drawn by the commotion, watching from shadows, holding their breath. Cobb's hand moved to his whip, started to uncoil it. You forgettin' your place, Charity. You forgettin' what happens to uppity slaves who think they can... The slap came fast, his open palm cracking across her face with enough force to snap her head sideways. Her lip split, blood warm and copper tasting on her tongue. The pain was sharp but familiar. She'd felt worse in the whip's kiss, had survived worse crossing the ocean. She straightened up, wiped the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, and looked Cobb dead in the eye, something she'd never done before, something that made him step back despite himself. I ain't forgot nothing, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I remember every lash, every chain, every child sold, every man taken. I remember it all, Mr. Cobb, and I'm telling you, my daughter ain't going to that house tonight. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something like fear flickered across Cobb's face. Then it hardened into rage. You just bought yourself a world of hurt, woman. Master Hargrove's gonna hear about this, and when he do, you gonna wish you'd kept your mouth shut. He turned and stalked away, his boots angry against the ground, leaving Charity standing there with blood on her lips and fire in her chest. The other slaves melted back into their cabins, afraid to be associated with rebellion, afraid the punishment would spread like fever to anyone who witnessed it. Only Aunt Beulah stayed, her old face grave with worry. Child, what have you done? She whispered. They gonna make you pay for this, they gonna make it hurt. Let 'em, Charity said, still watching the direction Cobb had gone. Some things worth paying for. Inside the cabin, little Mercy was sobbing. Ruth holding her tight. Josiah stood by the window, his jaw clenched, his hands shaking with the helpless fury of a boy who couldn't protect his mother or his sister from the world they lived in. Charity came inside, shut the door, and gathered all 4 of her children close. "Listen now," she said, her voice steady despite the blood still dripping from her lip. "Whatever come tomorrow, whatever they do, you remember this. I chose to protect you. I chose to say no, and that choice, that's mine. That's the one thing they can't take unless I give it." But even as she spoke, she knew the price wasn't paid yet, knew the reckoning was just beginning, knew that Belle Grove's white masters wouldn't let this challenge stand unanswered. The night deepened around them, heavy with waiting, heavy with the weight of what was coming. And somewhere in the big house, young Elias Hargrove raged at being denied what he thought was his by right of skin color and birth. The storm was gathering fast now, dark clouds piling up on the horizon of Charity's life, and soon, it would break. Sunday morning came with silence thick as fog. The work bell didn't ring. It was the Lord's day. Even masters pretended to honor that. But there was no rest waiting for Charity and her family. Just dread, heavy as chains, settling over the quarters like a burial shroud. Cobb came after breakfast, flanked by 2 other white men Charity didn't recognize, probably hired paddy rollers from town. Master Hargrove walked behind them, his face set hard as granite. Young Elias beside him with a look of satisfaction that made Charity's stomach turn. "Charity," Master Hargrove called out, his voice carrying across the quarters. "Bring your children, all of them. Now." She knew then. Lord have mercy, she knew. This wasn't going to be a private whipping or a night in the punishment shed. This was going to be public, going to be a lesson, going to be the kind of cruelty that masters used to remind every slave on the plantation what happened when you forgot your place. Her hands shook as she gathered Josiah, Elijah, Ruth, and little Mercy. The children were silent, their eyes wide with fear, clutching at each other like they could draw strength from touch. "Mama, what's happening?" Elijah whispered, his voice small and frightened. "Hush now, baby," Charity said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever come, we face it together. You hear? We face it together." They walked toward the center of the quarters where the whipping post stood. That cursed tree, old as sin, with iron rings embedded in the trunk, its bark stained dark from decades of blood. Other slaves gathered round, forced to witness, their faces masks of grief and helpless anger. Master Hargrove stood before the post, his hands clasped behind his back like a preacher about to deliver a sermon. "You all know why we're here," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "Last night, this woman defied a direct order from my son. She refused to send her daughter when summoned. Such disobedience cannot stand. She was protecting her child," someone shouted from the crowd. Charity couldn't see who, but the voice was quickly silenced by Cobb's glare. "Protection?" Young Elias stepped forward, his educated voice dripping with false righteousness. "Protection from what? I merely wanted help organizing my library. The fact that she assumed something improper says more about her corrupted mind than my intentions." Liar. The word burned in Charity's throat, but she swallowed it down, knowing it would only make things worse. "The punishment," Master Hargrove continued, "must fit the crime. Since Charity values her children so highly, she will watch them receive the lashes she earned by her defiance." The words hit like a physical blow. Not her, them, her babies, her reason for breathing. The cruelty of it stole the air from her lungs. "No!" Charity broke free, threw herself at Hargrove's feet, pride forgotten, dignity abandoned. "Please, master, whip me. Beat me till I can't stand. But leave my children be. They ain't done nothing." "Exactly," Hargrove said coldly. "They've done nothing. This isn't about them. It's about you learning that defiance has consequences beyond yourself. Maybe next time you'll think twice before refusing an order." Cobb grabbed Josiah first, the boy struggling, but no match for a grown man's strength. They stripped his shirt off, tied his wrists to the iron ring, his young back exposed and vulnerable, already cross-hatched with old scars from previous whippings. 20 lashes, Hargrove said. Each of them. 80 lashes total, divided among her babies like devils dividing up souls. Charity screamed, fought against the hands holding her back, but 3 men held her fast, forced her to stand and watch, forced her eyes open when she tried to close them. The whip sang its terrible song, crack, 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 and Josiah's screams pierced the morning air, cut through Charity's heart like the whip cut through his flesh. Blood bloomed across his back in cruel roses, each strike a violation, each cry a dagger twisting in his mama's soul. Then Elijah, younger, smaller, his thin shoulders shaken with sobs before the first lash even fell. Then Ruth, her daughter's screams higher-pitched, more desperate. Then little Mercy, sweet Jesus, little Mercy, whose innocence this was all meant to protect, now suffering for that very protection. Charity stopped screaming after a while, went silent, went still, something breaking inside her that had held together through 25 years of bondage. She watched each strike, memorized each one, counted them in her heart like prayers, like promises, like debts that would one day, be paid in full. When it was over, when all 80 lashes had fallen and her children hung limp against the post, Cobb cut them down one by one. They collapsed in the dirt, their backs raw meat, their clothes soaked with blood, their voices hoarse from screaming. Charity was released. She ran to them, gathered them as best she could, her hands hovering over their wounds, afraid to touch, afraid to hurt them more. "Remember this," young Elias said, speaking directly to her, his voice soft but venomous. "Remember that your stubbornness did this, and know that next time I send for your daughter, she'll come willing, or this will seem like mercy compared to what follows." He walked away then, his boots clicking on the packed earth, his back straight with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his cruelty. And something in Charity, something human and soft and capable of forgiveness, died right there in the dust beside her bleeding children. What grew in its place was cold and hard and patient, sharp as the blade she'd one day use, unbreakable as the will that would drive her hand when the time came. They thought they'd broken her. They thought this punishment would teach submission. But all they'd done was forge vengeance from a mother's love, had planted seeds of retribution in soil watered with her children's blood. And those seeds would grow, slow and sure, until the day of harvest came. The sun climbed higher that Sunday, pouring heat down on the quarters like God himself had turned his face away. Couldn't bear to watch what his children was doing to each other in his name. The other slaves had scattered after the whipping, gone back to their cabins with heads down and hearts heavy, knowing they'd just witnessed something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Charity knelt in the dirt beside her children, her dress soaked through with their blood, her hands shaking as she tried to figure where to start, how to fix what had been broken. Aunt Beulah came with a bucket of water and clean rags, her old face wet with tears she wasn't even trying to hide. "We got to get them inside," Beulah whispered, her voice cracking. "Got to tend these wounds 'fore the flies come, 'fore infection sets in." Together they lifted Josiah first, the oldest, the strongest, but Lord, he felt light as a child in Charity's arms, his body gone limp from pain and shock. They carried him to the cabin, laid him face down on the straw mattress, his back a landscape of torn flesh, blood still oozing from the deepest cuts where the whip had bit down to bone. Elijah came next, then Ruth, then finally little Mercy, each one of them crying soft and broken, the kind of crying that comes when the body's too tired to scream anymore but the soul still hurts too much for silence. "Mama," Josiah whispered through gritted teeth, his young face pressed against the mattress. "Why they do this to us? What we done?" "You ain't done nothing, baby," Charity said, her voice hollow. "This ain't about what you done. It's about what I wouldn't do." "Then why we suffering for it?" Ruth's voice came small and frightened from across the room. "Why they punish us for your choice?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Charity had no answer that would ease the pain, no words that would make sense of a world built on such cruelty. She dipped the rag in cool water, began the slow work of cleaning the wounds, each touch making her children flinch, each whimper cutting through her like knives. Aunt Beulah worked beside her, murmuring old prayers in a language half-remembered from Africa, calling on spirits and saints to ease the suffering, to close the wounds, to let these children live through this nightmare. She made a poultice from herbs she kept hidden, comfrey and yarrow, plantain and witch hazel, things the old ones knew about, knowledge passed down through generations of healing bodies the masters broke. But even as they worked, even as they washed and bound and prayed, Charity felt something shifting inside herself. The tears that should have come wouldn't fall. The grief that should have doubled her over felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, someone who still believed in begging, in mercy, in the possibility that white folks might one day see slaves as human. That woman was gone, bled out along with her children's blood in the dirt of Belle Grove. What remained was harder, colder, forged in the fire of this moment like steel tempered in flame. Little Mercy, despite her pain, turned her head to look at her mama with eyes that saw too much, eyes that carried that gift of sight the old ones spoke of. "Mama," she whispered, "I see blood. So much blood. But it ain't ours no more." Charity's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping around Elijah's back. "What you mean, child?" "I see fire. I see the big house burning. I see white folks screaming the way we scream. I see you, Mama, standing in the middle of it all with a whip in your hand and death in your eyes." The words should have frightened Charity, should have made her hush the girl, tell her such talk was dangerous. But instead, she felt something like recognition, like Mercy was speaking aloud what Charity's own soul had already whispered in the darkness. "Hush now, baby," she said softly, but not in denial. "Rest yourself. We all need rest." Through the long afternoon, she tended her children, bathed their wounds, helped them sip water when the pain let them swallow. And with each gentle touch, with each moment of their suffering, another piece of her old self fell away. Another brick was laid in the foundation of what she was becoming. By the time night fell and the quarters grew quiet, Charity sat in the doorway of her cabin, staring out at the whipping post that stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. The blood, her children's blood, still stained the ground around it, already drying to rust in the Mississippi heat. She didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't ask God why or beg for strength to endure. Instead, she made a promise, not to heaven, not to the ancestors, but to herself and to her children who lay suffering behind her. This debt would be paid. Every lash would be remembered. Every scream would be answered. And the ones who did this, the ones who thought themselves untouchable in their white skin and their big house on the hill, they would learn that even the powerless can find power in rage, can find justice in vengeance, can find freedom in the willingness to burn the whole world down. For 3 days and nights, Charity nursed her children while something dark and cold settled in her chest, where her heart used to beat warm. She didn't sleep much, couldn't close her eyes without seeing the whip fall, hearing their screams, watching young Elias's satisfied smile as her babies bled in the dust. Josiah's wounds festered despite the poultices, fever burning through him till he shook and mumbled things that didn't make sense. Ruth couldn't lie on her back for a week, had to sleep on her stomach while the torn flesh tried to knit itself back together. Elijah went silent, wouldn't speak except to answer yes or no, his young eyes gone old with pain and betrayal. And little Mercy, sweet Jesus, little Mercy kept having visions, kept seeing spirits gathering in the corners of the cabin, kept whispering about blood and fire and judgment coming like a flood. On the 4th night, when the worst of the fever had passed and the children finally slept quiet, Charity sat alone in the darkness and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She touched her own face, felt the dried blood on her lips from where Cobb had struck her, traced the lines of rage that had settled permanent-like around her mouth. She thought about Isaiah, wondering if he was still alive somewhere downriver, wondering if he'd heard somehow what happened to his children, if his heart broke across the distance the way hers was breaking right here. She thought about the African girl she'd been, the one named Ayodele, who danced under different stars, who knew freedom before she knew chains. That girl seemed like a dream now, like something she'd imagined in the ship's dark belly to keep from losing her mind. But what she was becoming, this was real. This was solid as iron, cold as river water in winter, sharp as the blade she'd started imagining in her hands. A soft sound made her turn. Josiah had woken, was watching her from the mattress, his young face gaunt in the moonlight coming through the cabin's cracks. "Mama," he whispered, his voice rough from days of screaming. "I hate them. I hate them so much it burns in my chest like fire." "I know, baby. You told us to keep our dignity, to hold our heads up, to remember we still human, even in chains." His eyes were hard now, older than his 13 years. "But what good is dignity when they can do this to us? What good is being human when they treat us like animals?" Charity crossed the small room, knelt beside her son's mattress, looked into eyes that reflected her own rage back at her. "You right," she said quietly, and the words felt like crossing a river she could never cross back. "Dignity ain't enough. Being human ain't enough, not when the world we live in don't recognize neither one." "Then what we supposed to do?" Josiah's hand found hers, his grip weak but fierce. "Just take it? Just let them beat us and use us and break us till we die?" "No," Charity said, the word coming from somewhere deep and dark inside her. "No, baby. We ain't gonna just take it." "Then what?" She looked at him for a long moment. This child she'd birthed in bondage. This boy whose back was striped with scars meant for her. This son who'd never known a day of freedom but who understood injustice with a clarity that cut like glass. "We gonna survive," she said slowly, each word heavy with meaning. "We gonna heal. We gonna smile and bow and say yes, massa, when they watchin'. We gonna make them think they broke us, think we learned our lesson, think we done forgot what they did. And then," Josiah's eyes gleamed in the darkness, "and then, when they least expect it, when they comfortable in their cruelty and certain in their power," Charity's voice dropped to barely a whisper, "we gonna remind them that every slave they ever beat, every child they ever sold, every family they ever tore apart, we remember. We all remember. And one day the remembering gonna turn into something they can't whip away or chain down or sell off." Josiah nodded slowly, understanding, passing between mother and son like a secret language. "Mama, when that day come, I want to be there. I want to see it." "You will, baby, you will." From across the room, another voice joined in. Elijah, who they'd thought was sleeping. "I want them to hurt like they hurt us," he said, his child's voice carrying a weight no child should have to bear. Then Ruth, "I want them to beg like you begged, Mama, and have nobody listen." And finally little Mercy, her gift of sight making her words sound like prophecy. "They will, sister. I seen it. The whipping post gonna taste white blood before this is over. The big house gonna burn. And Mama gonna stand in the ashes like an angel of judgment. And nobody gonna stop her." Charity gathered all 4 of her children close as their wounds would allow, careful of the tender flesh on their backs, and they sat there in the darkness, bound together not just by blood but by shared pain, by common rage, by a promise that was taking shape in the silence between heartbeats. She didn't cry. None of them did. Tears was for grief, and what they felt wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose, sharp and clear and cold. Outside, the night deepened. The plantation slept, ignorant and comfortable in its cruelty. Master Hargrove dreamed whatever masters dream. Young Elias rested easy, satisfied that he'd taught the slaves a lesson. Cobb counted his pay and planned tomorrow's work. And in a small cabin in the quarters, a mother and her children stopped being victims and started becoming something else. Something dangerous, something patient, something that would wait years if necessary, but would never, ever forget. Weeks passed, then months. The wounds on her children's backs healed into thick scars, permanent reminders written in raised flesh of what this plantation had done to them. But Charity healed different. On the outside, she became quieter, more obedient, keeping her eyes down and her mouth shut like a proper broken slave should. Inside, though, she was building something, piece by careful piece, brick by invisible brick. The first person she brought into her confidence was old Bess, the head cook in the big house kitchen. Bess had been at Belle Grove longer than anybody could remember, had cooked for Master Hargrove's daddy before him, had seen generations of slaves come and go, had survived by keeping her head down and her secrets close. But Bess had also lost 3 children to the auction block, had watched her husband die from infected whip wounds, had endured 50 years of bondage with a rage she kept hidden deep as roots in winter ground. Charity approached her one evening when the kitchen was empty, when the white folks had finished their supper and retired to the parlor for brandy and self-congratulation. "Aunt Bess," Charity said softly, using the respectful title all younger slaves used for the elders. "I need to talk with you about something that could get us both killed." Bess looked up from the pot she was scouring, her old eyes sharp despite the wrinkles around them. "That's so. Well then, maybe you best be quiet about it. Or maybe," Charity said, her voice steady, "maybe it's worth the risk." Something flickered across Bess's face, recognition maybe, or memory of her own younger rage before time had banked the fires. She set down the pot, wiped her hands on her apron, and nodded toward the back door. "Walk with me to the smokehouse. We talk there." In the darkness between buildings where white folks never ventured and other slaves knew better than to intrude, Charity laid out her plan. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to test whether Bess would help or betray her. "I need to know things," Charity said. "I need to know when Master Hargrove leaves the plantation, when he's in town, when he's distracted. I need to know which nights young Elias drinks heavy, when Mistress takes her laudanum, when Cobb visits his woman down the road." Bess was quiet for a long moment, her breath coming slow and measured in the darkness. "Why you need to know these things, child? You know why. Say it anyway. Say it out loud so we both know what we talking about here." Charity met the old woman's eyes, saw decades of suffering there, saw understanding that went deeper than words. "Because one day, when the time is right, I'm gonna make them pay for what they did to my children. And I need to know when that day can come." Bess nodded slowly. No shock on her face, no judgment, just a grim acceptance. "You ain't the first slave to think such thoughts, child. But most don't have the steel to do nothing about it. You think you different?" "I know I'm different," Charity said, and there was certainty in her voice that came from that night in the cabin when she'd stopped crying and started planning. "They made me different when they made my babies bleed for my defiance. They forged me into something that won't bend no more, won't break, won't forget." Right then," Bess said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll help you. I'll watch and listen and tell you what you need to know. But understand this. If we caught, if they suspect, they'll kill us slow. They'll make examples of us that'll keep other slaves scared for years to come." "I understand." "Do you? Do you really? 'Cause once you start down this road, ain't no turning back. You either see it through to blood and fire, or you die trying." "Then I'll die trying," Charity said simply. "But I won't die quiet, and I won't die forgiven." Over the following months, Charity built her network careful and slow. She brought in Samuel, the blacksmith, who could make a blade from a broken hoe and file down chains till they was weak enough to snap. She brought in young Moses, who carried messages between plantations and knew the roads better than most white folks. She brought in Clara, who worked in the laundry and could move through the big house like a ghost, seeing everything, heard everything, remembering it all. They never met together, never spoke openly about what they was doing. Instead, they passed information in coded words, in songs with double meanings, in the small rebellions that looked like accidents but was really sabotage. A wheel on Master Hargrove's carriage would come loose at just the right moment, slowing him down when he tried to leave. Medicine meant for sick slaves would disappear, finding its way to those who needed it more. Tools would go missing, turning up days later in places nobody expected. Small things, invisible things, acts of defiance so subtle the white folks never suspected they was being tested, being probed for weaknesses. And through it all, Charity played her part perfect. The obedient slave, the chastened mother, the woman who'd learned her lesson. She bowed her head, said yes, massa, worked her cotton quota, and gave no sign that behind her downcast eyes, she was watching, waiting, memorizing every detail of the plantation's rhythms and routines. Young Elias still watched little Mercy with hungry eyes, but he didn't call for her again. Not yet, satisfied that he'd broken the girl's mama enough that when the time came, there'd be no resistance. He was wrong, but he wouldn't know how wrong until it was far too late. One night, as Charity sat alone outside her cabin, Aunt Bess came and sat beside her. Two old women, one old in years, one old in soul, sharing the weight of what they was building. "You really gonna do this?" Bess asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes. Even knowing you probably won't survive it?" "Especially knowing that," Charity said. "Some things worth dying for, Aunt Bess, and making sure my children know their mama didn't go quiet into bondage, that their mama fought back, that she made the masters bleed the way they made us bleed. That's worth any price." Bess reached over, took Charity's hand in her own gnarled fingers. "Then I'll help you to the end, child. Whatever come, whatever the cost, I'll stand with you." And in that moment, Charity knew she wasn't alone no more. Knew that the rage she carried wasn't just hers, but belonged to every slave who'd ever been beaten, every mother who'd ever watched her children suffer, every soul that had endured the unendurable and survived with fury intact. The plan was taking shape, slow as cotton growing, patient as roots pushing through hard ground, inevitable as the harvest that was coming. 2 years crawled by like wounded animals dragging themselves through Mississippi mud. 2 years of Charity playing the part of broken slave, while her network grew silent and strong, beneath the surface of Belle Grove's daily cruelty. 2 years of watching and waiting, of gathering information like kindling for a fire that would one day consume everything. But patience, no matter how iron-willed, has its limits. And young Elias Hargrove was pressing hard against those limits. He'd grown bolder in his pursuit of little Mercy, who was 17 now and beautiful in a way that made her mama's heart ache with fear. He'd find excuses to be where she worked, would brush past her in doorways, would let his hand linger too long when passing her something, would speak in low tones about how she should be grateful for his attention, how other masters weren't as kind as he intended to be. Ruth reported it all back to Charity, her voice tight with rage. "He cornered Mercy in the pantry yesterday, Mama. Put his hand on her face, told her she was wasting her beauty in the fields. Said he could make her life easier if she'd just be reasonable." Charity's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. "What Mercy do?" She kept her eyes down, said "yes, sir," and "no, sir," like you taught her, then slipped away soon as she could. "But Mama," Ruth's voice dropped to a whisper, "he ain't gonna wait much longer. I can see it in his eyes. He's working himself up to taking what he thinks is his." That night, Charity called a meeting with her inner circle. Bess, Samuel, Moses, and Clara. In the root cellar beneath the smokehouse where they stored vegetables and sweet potatoes. It was the only place on the plantation where voices wouldn't carry, where they could speak true without fear of being overheard. "Time's running out," Charity said without preamble. "Young Elias is fixing to force himself on my daughter, and when he do, all our planning won't matter, 'cause I'll kill him with my bare hands and they'll hang me before sunset." "Then we move up the timeline," Samuel said, his deep voice steady. "We act before he act." "But we ain't ready," Moses protested. "We still learning the patrol routes, still figuring out which overseers is where on which nights. If we move too soon, if we get caught—" "We already caught," Bess interrupted, her old voice sharp. "We been caught since the day they put chains on our ancestors. The question ain't if we caught, it's whether we go down fighting or go down quiet." Clara, who'd been silent till now, spoke up soft but clear. "I've been watching the master's schedule. 3 weeks from now, he's going to Natchez for a cotton traders convention. Be gone 4 days, maybe 5. Mistress Hargrove always takes extra laudanum when he's gone. She'll sleep heavy. And Cobb—" She paused, almost smiled. "Cobb's been sneaking off every Thursday night to see that mulatto woman in the quarters on the east side. He don't get back till near dawn." "That's our window," Charity said, feeling her heart beat faster, feeling the moment she'd been building toward finally coming into focus. Thursday night, 3 weeks from now, when the master's gone and Cobb's distracted. "And young Elias?" Samuel asked. Charity's eyes went hard as stone. Young Elias will get exactly what he's been begging for, just not the way he expects. But fate, as it always do, had other plans. 2 weeks before their planned date, young Elias made his move. It was a Sunday afternoon, hot and still, most folks resting in the quiet before evening chores. Little Mercy had gone to the well for water, alone despite Charity's warnings. Young and foolish enough to think daylight offered protection. Elias found her there, no witnesses nearby, the well hidden from view by the old oak tree that grew beside it. What happened next, Mercy told her mama in broken whispers later. Her dress torn, her face bruised, her spirit shaken, but thank God, her body still her own because Ruth had come looking for her sister, had arrived just in time to scream loud enough to bring others running. Elias had fled, frustrated and angry, knowing he'd been interrupted before accomplishing his purpose. But the message was clear. Next time, there might not be a next time to interrupt him. Charity held her daughter close, felt the trembling in Mercy's young body, saw the fear in her eyes, and something inside her snapped like a rope pulled too tight for too long. "Mama, please," Mercy sobbed. "Please don't do nothing that'll get you killed. Please just let it go. I can survive it. I can survive him if I have to. Just don't leave us orphaned for my sake." "Hush now, baby," Charity whispered, stroking her daughter's hair, her voice calm despite the fury raging in her chest. "You ain't gonna have to survive nothing. Not his touch, not his violation, not his cruelty. I promised to protect you and I meant it." That evening, Charity sent word through the network. The plan moves up. Thursday night, 3 days from now. No more waiting, no more patience, no more pretending that time would somehow make things right. The storm that had been gathering for 2 years, for 27 years, for centuries of bondage and brutality, that storm was about to break. And when it did, Belgrove Plantation would learn that even the powerless have power when they got nothing left to lose, that even the meek can turn fierce when their children are threatened, that vengeance delayed ain't vengeance denied. Charity looked up at the big house on the hill, silhouetted against the dying light, and smiled a smile that held no warmth, no mercy, no forgiveness. Thursday night, 3 days, and then the reckoning would come. The 3 days passed slow as molasses in winter, each hour heavy with the weight of what was coming. Charity moved through her work like always, picking cotton, hauling water, keeping her face blank and her thoughts hidden. But inside, she was counting heartbeats, counting breaths, counting the steps between where she stood and where she needed to become Thursday night. On Wednesday afternoon, while working in the big house kitchen helping old Bess prepare supper, Charity saw something that made her blood run cold and hot all at once. Hanging on a hook by the back door of Master Hargrove's study was his personal whip, the one he kept for special occasions, the one with leather braided tight around thin strips of metal that could cut through flesh like butter. It was the same whip Cobb had used on her children 2 years ago, the same whip that had painted their young backs with permanent scars, the same instrument of torture that haunted Charity's dreams and fueled her waking fury. "Bess," she whispered, her eyes fixed on that coiled serpent of leather and metal. "I need that whip." The old woman followed her gaze, understood immediately. "Child, that's too dangerous. Master Hargrove checks on that whip regular, keeps it oiled and ready. He'll notice if it's gone." "I don't need it gone," Charity said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I just need to borrow it. Thursday night. You think you can get it to me?" Bess was quiet for a long moment, stirring the pot of beans on the stove, her weathered face thoughtful. "You really gonna use that thing on him? On the man who owns it?" "I'm gonna use it on all of them," Charity said, and there was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt, just cold certainty. "The master, his wife, and especially his son. I'm gonna make them feel every lash they ever gave us, every cut, every tear of flesh. And I'm gonna do it with the same whip they used on my babies." "There's a poetry to that," Bess said softly, almost admiringly. "A terrible, bloody poetry." "Ain't about poetry," Charity corrected. "It's about justice. It's about making sure they understand in their last moments what they done to us, what it feels like to be helpless, while someone with power tears your world apart. That evening, Charity went to Samuel the blacksmith and asked him for something she'd been thinking about for months. "Can you sharpen a whip?" she asked. "Make the metal edges keener, make it bite deeper." Samuel's eyes widened, then narrowed with understanding. "You talking about the master's whip?" "I am." He nodded slow, pulled her into the shadows of his forge where the firelight danced like demons on the walls. "I can do that. I can make it cut so deep it'll strike bone. But Charity, once you use something like that, once you draw that kind of blood, ain't no coming back from it, you understand?" "I've been past coming back for 2 years now," she said. "Ever since I watched my children bleed in the dirt. This ain't about coming back, this is about going forward into whatever comes next, even if that's death." Samuel studied her face in the firelight, saw the transformation that had happened to this woman who'd once been soft-hearted enough to weep over a broken bird, who'd once sung lullabies to her babies with a voice full of hope. That woman was gone, burned away in the crucible of injustice. "All right then," he said. "Bring me the whip tomorrow night and I'll work on it after dark. By Thursday it'll be ready. It'll be sharper than anything the master ever imagined, sharp enough to do what you need it to do." Wednesday night, Charity couldn't sleep. She lay in her cabin with her children breathing soft around her, and she thought about what tomorrow would bring. She thought about the blood that would flow, the screams that would echo, the finality of what she was about to do. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she wavered, wondered if there was another way, some path that didn't end in violence and death, some solution that the preacher might approve of, some forgiveness that would let her keep her soul clean. But then she remembered Josiah's screams, Elijah's tears, Ruth's broken sobs, little Mercy's terrified eyes as young Elias tried to violate her. She remembered Isaiah being dragged away, remembered the casual cruelty of masters who thought they owned not just bodies but souls, who believed their white skin gave them the right to destroy black families without consequence. And the wavering stopped. The doubt died. What rose in its place was resolution hard as iron, cold as winter wind, sharp as the whip that would soon sing its terrible song. Tomorrow night, she thought. Tomorrow night, Belgrove learns that the meek don't always inherit the earth. Sometimes they burn it down instead. She touched each of her sleeping children gently, memorizing their faces in case she never saw them again after tomorrow. Then she closed her eyes and waited for dawn, waited for Thursday, waited for the reckoning that had been 27 years in the making. Thursday arrived with clouds thick and low, swallowing the sky like the earth itself was holding its breath. By late afternoon, the air had grown heavy with the promise of rain, that electric feeling that comes before a storm, when even the birds go quiet and the wind stills like it's waiting for something terrible to begin. Perfect, Charity thought. The ancestors are with us. Master Hargrove had left for Natchez that morning, his carriage loaded with trunks and ledgers, his mind already on the business deals he'd make selling other men's cotton grown on other men's slaves' backs. Mistress Hargrove had taken to her bed with a headache, dosed herself heavy with laudanum like Clara predicted, her snores already drifting through the big house by supper time. Young Elias spent the day riding the plantation on horseback, overseeing the work with Cobb, playing at being master while his daddy was away. He didn't know he was counting down his last hours, didn't feel the noose tightening around his worthless life. As darkness fell, Charity gathered with her small group in the root cellar one final time. Samuel had the whip, newly sharpened, its metal edges gleaming wicked in the candlelight. Bess had stolen the key to the big house's back entrance, the one the cook used for early morning deliveries. Moses had confirmed Cobb's whereabouts, already gone to visit his woman, wouldn't return till near dawn. Clara reported the house was quiet, just young Elias and a handful of house servants who could be trusted to look the other way. "This is it," Charity said, her voice steady. "Once we start, we can't stop. Once blood is drawn, we either finish what we begun or die trying. Any of y'all want to back out, now's the time. I won't hold it against you." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering, that had endured too many indignities, that had finally found something worth risking everything for. "All right then," Charity said, taking the whip from Samuel. feeling its weight in her hands, feeling the rightness of it. Let's go remind these white folks that we still human, still got wills of our own, still capable of making them bleed the way they made us bleed. The storm broke just as they reached the big house. Rain coming down in sheets, thunder rolling across the delta like God's own drums beating out a war song. The noise would cover any sounds they made, would keep folks in their cabins, would give them the cover they needed. Bess unlocked the back door with hands that barely shook despite her age, despite her fear. They slipped inside quiet as shadows, water dripping from their clothes onto the fine wooden floors that Ruth and other house slaves scrubbed daily on their knees. The house was dark except for lamplight coming from the study where young Elias sat with a book and a glass of his daddy's whiskey, thinking himself lord of all he surveyed, master of a kingdom built on broken backs and stolen lives. Charity moved down the hallway with Samuel, Moses, and Clara behind her. Bess stayed at the entrance, keeping watch, ready to warn them if anyone came. Each step felt weighted with history, with all the steps her people had taken in chains, all the journeys across auction blocks and whipping posts, all the miles walked in bondage. But this walk was different. This walk was free, even if freedom only lasted tonight, even if it ended in death. This walk was choice, was agency, was the reclaiming of power from those who'd stolen it. They reached the study door. Inside, young Elias sat with his back to them, completely unaware, completely vulnerable, completely about to understand what it meant to be powerless. Charity pushed the door open slow, stepped inside with the whip coiled in her hand. The others fanned out behind her, blocking the exits, their faces hard with purpose. Elias heard the movement, started to turn, his mouth opening to demand who dared enter without permission. But the words died when he saw Charity, saw the whip, saw the cold fury in her eyes that promised he was about to pay every debt he'd ever ignored. "Good evening, Master Elias," Charity said, her voice soft as velvet, deadly as poison. "Remember me? Remember my children? Remember what you did to them in the yard while I was forced to watch?" His face went pale, his eyes darting to the door, realizing it was blocked, realizing he was trapped, realizing for the first time in his privileged life that being white wouldn't save him tonight. What are you doing?" he stammered, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice cracking with fear. "You'll hang for this, all of you." "Maybe," Charity said, uncoiling the whip slowly, letting him see it, letting him recognize his daddy's favorite instrument of torture. "But before we do, you gonna learn what it feels like to be on the receiving end of this thing. You gonna learn what my babies learned. You gonna scream like they screamed, and nobody gonna save you." Thunder crashed overhead, as if the heavens themselves approved, and young Elias finally understood that tonight, the natural order of Belle Grove Plantation was about to be violently, bloodily, righteously overturned. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the world clean, preparing the earth for the blood that was about to water it. Lord have mercy on what happened next, though mercy was the last thing on Charity's mind. Samuel and Moses grabbed young Elias before he could run. His fancy education and white skin meaning nothing against the strength of men who'd hauled cotton bales and chopped wood their whole lives. They bound his hands with rope, gagged his mouth to muffle his screams, and dragged him through the house toward the quarters. Clara and Charity went upstairs quiet as death itself, moving through the darkened hallways to where Mistress Hargrove slept in her laudanum fog. The woman barely stirred when they lifted her from her bed, her eyes fluttering open, confused and clouded. "What? Who are you? What's happening?" she mumbled, her words slurred. "Justice," Charity said simply, binding the woman's wrists. "Justice is happening, mistress, and you bout to witness it firsthand." They brought both of them to the whipping yard, that cursed place where so much black blood had soaked into the earth, and tied them to the same posts where Charity's children had suffered. The rain was relentless, turning the ground to mud, washing over everyone like baptismal waters, preparing them for what was coming. Word had spread through the quarters despite the storm. Slaves emerged from their cabins wrapped in whatever rags they had against the rain, drawn by something they couldn't name but could feel in their bones. The sense that tonight, after centuries of bondage, something fundamental was shifting in the universe. Charity's children came too. Josiah and Elijah, Ruth and little Mercy. Standing at the front of the growing crowd, their faces solemn as grave markers, their scars hidden beneath wet clothes but never forgotten. The gag was removed from young Elias's mouth, and immediately he started begging, his educated voice reducing to pleading like any other man facing death. Please, please, I never meant. I was just. Father will pay you. He'll give you freedom, money, anything. Just please don't. Quiet, Charity commanded, and something in her voice made him obey, made him choke back his words. You gonna be quiet now, and listen. Gonna listen like my children had to listen to their own screams while you watched and smiled. She walked to where Mistress Hargrove sagged against the post, the laudanum wearing off enough for fear to creep into the woman's eyes. You knew, Charity said to her. All these years you knew what your husband did, what your son was becoming, and you said nothing. Did nothing. Let it happen because our pain was easier to ignore than your comfort was to sacrifice. The mistress's lips trembled, but no words came out. Charity turned to address everyone gathered, the slaves who'd suffered under Belgrove's cruelty, the witnesses to tonight's reversal, the ones who'd carry this story forward. For 27 years, I bent my back to their whip. I picked their cotton, raised my children in chains, watched everything I loved be beaten and broken and sold away. And when I finally said no, when I finally tried to protect my daughter from this piece of filth, she gestured at young Elias. They made my babies bleed for it. She held up the whip, let everyone see it gleaming in the lamplight someone had brought from the quarters. This is the same whip that tore my children's flesh. The same weapon of torture they used to keep us broken and afraid. Tonight, it's gonna tell a different story. Charity, Aunt Bess stepped forward, her old voice carrying across the yard. You do this. You can't never undo it. You know that, child? You know what you're becoming? I know exactly what I'm becoming, Charity said, her eyes on young Elias, who was crying now, tears mixing with rain on his face. I'm becoming the nightmare they deserve. I'm becoming the price of their cruelty. I'm becoming what they made me. She raised the whip high, and in that moment, she looked like one of the old African warrior queens, like justice personified, like vengeance taking human form. The first lash fell on Mistress Hargrove, cutting through her nightdress and into flesh that had never known real pain before. The woman's scream was shrill, inhuman, the sound of privilege meeting consequence. Then young Elias. The whip sang through rain-soaked air and bit into his back, the sharpened metal edges doing exactly what Samuel had promised, cutting deep, striking true, making him feel every fraction of the pain he'd inflicted on others. Charity counted each lash like she was counting prayers, like she was counting debts being repaid. 20 for Josiah, 20 for Elijah, 20 for Ruth, 20 for little Mercy. 80 lashes total, returned with interest. The sound of the whip cracking, of flesh tearing, of white folks screaming the way black folks had screamed for generations. It echoed across Belgrove Plantation like thunder, like judgment, like the voice of God finally speaking up for the oppressed. When Charity finally lowered the whip, her arm aching, her clothes soaked with rain and blood, both Master's wife and Master's son hung limp against the posts, their backs ruined, their spirits broken, their lives draining into Mississippi mud. The slaves stood in silence, witnesses to something they'd never thought they'd see. White blood watering the whipping post, white folks learning what bondage truly meant. The natural order of Belgrove turned completely upside down, and Charity stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, the whip still in her hand, knowing this was both an ending and a beginning, knowing the price would be high but that some things were worth any cost. Mistress Hargrove died first, her body too soft for the brutality it had witnessed but never felt until tonight. Her last breath came ragged and wet, a final whimper that carried no apology, no understanding, just the shock of someone who never imagined consequences could reach her. But young Elias lingered, clinging to life with the same stubbornness his family had used to cling to power. Blood pooled beneath him. Rain diluted it to pink rivers running through the mud. But still he breathed. Still he tried to speak. Charity walked to where he hung, tilted his head back so he had to look at her. Had to see the face of the woman whose children he'd tortured, whose daughter he'd tried to violate. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely there. "Please, I'll do anything. Father he'll give you." "Your father ain't here," Charity said, her voice empty of emotion now, drained of everything but cold fact. "And even if he was, there ain't nothing he could give me that would make up for what you took. You understand? Money can't buy back my husband. Freedom papers can't erase my children's scars. There ain't no price that balances this scale except the one you're paying right now. I'm sorry," he choked out, and maybe he even meant it. Maybe facing death had taught him something about humanity his whole privileged life had never shown him. "I'm sorry for what I did, for what I was." "I know you are," Charity said. "Now you sorry. Now when it's too late, when your blood's draining out and death's knocking at your door. But where was that sorry when my baby screamed? Where was it when you watched your daddy sell my husband like he was cattle? Where was it when you looked at my 15-year-old daughter like she was property you could take?" She raised the whip one final time, and Elias's eyes went wide with the terrible knowledge that his last moments had come. "This is for little Mercy," Charity said. "For every girl on every plantation who couldn't protect herself from men like you. For every mother who had to watch her daughter be violated. For every scream that went unanswered. Every prayer that went unheard. Every soul that suffered because folks like your family thought they had the right." The final lash felt precise and brutal, opening his throat in one clean strike. Blood sprayed dark against the rain, and young Elias Hargrove's last sound was a wet gurgle as he realized what it meant to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy, to die without dignity or choice. Charity dropped the whip, let it fall into the mud where it belonged, and turned to face the crowd of slaves who'd watched the whole thing in stunned silence. "I know what y'all thinking," she said, her voice carrying despite the storm. "You thinking I'm damned now, thinking I sold my soul, thinking this was evil and wrong and gonna bring the wrath of God down on all of us." She paused, looked at each face. Old Bess, Samuel, Moses, Clara, her own children, and all the others who'd suffered under Belle Grove's cruelty. "Maybe you right. Maybe I am damned. Maybe God gonna judge me harsh for what I done here tonight. But I'll tell you what. I'd rather burn in hell knowing I fought back than spend eternity wishing I had. I'd rather die knowing I protected my children than live another day watching them suffer. And if that makes me evil in the eyes of heaven, then so be it. I'll answer for my sins when my time comes. But these white folks," she gestured at the bodies, "they gonna answer right now. What about Master Hargrove?" someone called from the crowd. "He gonna come back from Natchez. He gonna bring the law, bring the army, bring hell itself down on us for this. Then we burn it." Josiah spoke up, stepping forward, his young voice strong despite his years. "We burn the big house, burn the evidence, scatter to the winds before he gets back. Some of us run north, some hide in the swamps, some disappear into other plantations. Make it look like night riders or marauders. Make it so he can't prove nothing." "The boy's right," Samuel agreed. "We got maybe 2 days before Master Hargrove returns. That's enough time to cover our tracks. Enough time for those who want freedom to run for it." Charity looked at her son with pride, seeing the man he was becoming, the strength he'd found even in bondage. Then she looked at little Mercy, who stood quiet and still, her eyes seeing things others couldn't. "Mama," Mercy said softly, "I see fire, just like I told you I would. The big house burning bright as day, light enough to see by for miles, and I see you walking away from it free for the first time since you crossed that ocean." "You see me alive, baby?" Charity asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. Mercy's silence was answer enough. "That's a right," Charity said, pulling her daughter close. "I ain't afraid of dying. Been dead inside for years now. This here tonight? This was me coming back to life just long enough to make things right." The rain began to ease as they set the fire, as they carried torches to the big house and watched it catch, watched the flames climb the white columns and lick at the fine curtains, watched Belle Grove's symbol of power and oppression turn to ash and smoke. The slaves scattered like wind through grass, some running north toward freedom, some disappearing into the bayous and swamps where dogs couldn't track them, some slipping away to other plantations where they'd blend in and never speak of this night again. But Charity stood and watched the fire burn, her children beside her, the heat drying the rain from their clothes, the light bright enough to cast shadows that looked like dancing ancestors celebrating justice finally served. "We should go, Mama," Ruth urged. "We should run while we can." "Y'all go," Charity said. "Head north like we planned. Follow the drinking gourd to freedom. But I'm staying. Somebody got to stay. Got to be the one they blame. Got to make sure the story gets told right." "No!" All four of her children spoke at once, but Charity shook her head. "This ain't up for debate, babies. Y'all got your whole lives ahead of you. But me, I'm tired. I'm done running, done surviving, done bending. I said what I needed to say tonight, did what I needed to do. Now it's time to rest." She embraced each of them one final time, whispered blessings and instructions, sent them off into the night with Moses and some others who knew the paths north. And then Charity sat down in the mud, the fire warm on her face, the whip beside her where she'd dropped it, and waited for the dawn that would bring Master Hargrove's return, that would bring her reckoning, that would end her story the only way it could end after a night like this. Dawn broke gray and cold over the smoldering ruins of Belle Grove. The big house was nothing but blackened timbers and ash, smoke still rising like prayers to a heaven that had finally listened. Charity sat where she'd been all night, the whip beside her, her clothes stiff with dried blood that wasn't hers, waiting for whatever came next. But what came wasn't Master Hargrove returning early. What came was old Bess, moving faster than her ancient bones should allow, shaking Charity's shoulder urgent-like. "Child, you gotta move." Cobb came back early, found the bodies, already riding for town to fetch the sheriff and the patty rollers. "You got maybe an hour before they come with dogs and guns and rope for a lynching. Now get up and run." Charity looked at the old woman, saw fierce determination in those weathered eyes. "I told you, Aunt Bess. I'm done running. And I'm telling you that your children need you alive more than Belle Grove needs you dead." Bess grabbed her arm, pulled hard. "You think your baby's gonna understand you throwing your life away when you could be free? You think they're gonna forgive you for choosing martyrdom over motherhood?" The words hit harder than any whip. Charity thought of Josiah, Elijah, Ruth, and Little Mercy heading north without her. Thought of them reaching freedom only to learn their mama had let herself be caught and hanged. Thought of the grief that would carry. "The swamp," Bess said, reading her hesitation as consent. "Samuel's waiting there with a boat. He'll take you through the bayou to where you can catch up with your children. But you got to go now, Charity. Right now." Charity stood on legs that felt like wood, looked one last time at the ruins of Belle Grove, at the whipping post still standing in the yard, at the place where she'd spent 27 years in bondage, and one night in terrible, beautiful freedom. She ran then, through fields still wet from rain, through cotton that would rot unharvested, through a plantation that would never recover from what she'd done. Samuel was waiting in the cypress shadows with a shallow-bottom boat, his face grim but proud. "You did it," he said simply. "You really did it." "We did it," Charity corrected, climbing into the boat. "All of us together." They pushed off into dark water that smelled of earth and secrets, navigating through Spanish moss and gator-infested channels that only someone born to these swamps could navigate. Behind them, dogs started baying, white men's voices shouting orders, the machinery of vengeance spinning up too late to catch what it was chasing. 3 weeks later, Charity found her children in a conductor's house outside Memphis, all of them alive and whole, and one step closer to the North Star they'd been following. The reunion was tears and embraces, and whispered thanks to ancestors who'd guided them through. But Charity's freedom was short-lived. The story of Belle Grove had spread like wildfire, had made her a legend and a target. Slave catchers tracked her for months, finally cornered her in a barn outside Louisville. The fight was brief and brutal. end in the way she'd always known it would, with her blood water in free soil instead of plantation ground. But before she died, before the bullet found her heart, Charity smiled. Smiled knowing her children had made it to Canada, to real freedom. Smiled knowing Belgrove's ashes still smoldered in Mississippi. Smiled knowing that even in death she'd won something no master could ever take back. Now listen, children. This story I just told you, it happened, maybe not exactly like this, maybe not with these names, but somewhere, sometime, a mother like Charity stood up and said, "No more." Somewhere, a slave fought back. Somewhere, the oppressed became the avenger. And that memory, that refusal to accept bondage quietly, that willingness to make masters bleed, that fierce love of a mother protecting her children, that memory lives on, lives in us, lives in every descendant who carries that fire, who remembers the price our people paid, who knows that freedom ain't free and justice don't come from begging. The ones who suffered ain't forgotten. The ones who fought back still walk among us in spirit, and their voices still echo through time, reminding us that even in chains we chose how we faced our bondage. Some bent, some broke, but some like Charity, they rose up and made the whole world tremble. Who suffered, suffered. Who resisted, left memory. And memory we keep here in the echoes from the quarters.